August 21st, 1986 began like any other day in the remote highlands of northwestern Cameroon. Nestled among rolling green hills and volcanic mountains sat several small villages where life moved at a slow and familiar pace. Farmers worked their fields beneath the hot African sun, children played along dusty paths, and families prepared for another quiet evening. Above them all loomed Lake Nyos, a deep crater lake surrounded by steep cliffs and dense vegetation. To the villagers, it was simply part of the landscape. The lake provided water, attracted wildlife, and had existed for generations without causing concern. No one living nearby had any reason to fear it. As the sun began to set, smoke rose from cooking fires and the sounds of daily life gradually faded. Families gathered for dinner, some shared stories, others discussed crops, weather, and plans for the coming days. Livestock settled into their pens while the last traces of daylight disappeared behind the mountains. It was an ordinary evening in every possible way. Yet beneath the calm surface of Lake Nyos, something invisible had been building for years. Unknown to everyone in the surrounding villages, the lake sat atop a region shaped by ancient volcanic activity. Deep below the water, carbon dioxide gas seeped upward from the earth and slowly dissolved into the lake's depths. The process was silent, gradual, and completely hidden. Year after year, more gas accumulated in the dark waters below. The lake had become a gigantic natural trap, storing an unimaginable amount of deadly gas beneath its peaceful surface. But nobody knew. There were no warning signs, no strange colors in the water, no official reports, no scientists studying the lake closely enough to recognize the danger. As darkness settled over the region, families climbed into bed, believing tomorrow would be no different from today. Sometime after nightfall, a few people reported hearing an unusual sound. Survivors would later describe it as a distant rumble, like thunder echoing across the mountains. Others spoke of a strange roaring noise coming from the direction of the lake. For most, however, the night passed in complete silence. Then, without warning, disaster struck. Somewhere in the depths of Lake Nyos, the delicate balance that had held the trapped gas in place finally collapsed. In a matter of moments, an enormous volume of carbon dioxide burst upward from the lake. The eruption was unlike anything most people imagine when they hear the word volcano. There was no lava, no fire, and no explosion visible from miles away. Instead, an invisible cloud of gas erupted from the water and spilled over the edges of the crater. The carbon dioxide raced downhill, hugging the ground as it moved through valleys and across villages. Because the gas was heavier than air, it flowed like a silent flood. It slipped beneath doors, through windows, and into homes where families slept peacefully. There were no screams warning neighbors, no frantic calls for help, no desperate attempts to escape. Many victims simply lost consciousness where they lay. Entire households fell silent within minutes. As the deadly cloud spread outward, it consumed village after village. Livestock collapsed in fields, birds dropped from the sky, dogs never barked, goats never ran. The gas moved relentlessly through the darkness, covering nearly 15 miles of countryside. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The invisible cloud gradually dispersed into the atmosphere, leaving behind a landscape that appeared untouched. The mountains still stood. The trees remained green. Homes were still standing. There were no signs of battle, no evidence of a storm, and no visible destruction. Yet when dawn finally arrived, the villages surrounding Lake Nyos had become a graveyard. Survivors who awoke that morning found themselves surrounded by an eerie silence unlike anything they had ever experienced. One man opened his eyes to discover members of his family lying motionless beside him. Others stumbled from their homes, confused and weak, only to find neighbors dead where they had fallen. Entire families lay together as if still asleep. Cattle and goats were scattered across fields without a single sign of injury. Roads that should have been filled with people beginning their day were completely empty. Everywhere survivors looked, there was death. At first, nobody understood what had happened. Some believed a curse had descended upon the villages. Others feared poison, disease, or an attack. The silence itself felt unnatural. It was as though life had simply been erased during the night. As word of the catastrophe slowly spread beyond the mountains, authorities and rescue workers began making their way toward the isolated region. None of them were prepared for what they were about to find. As rescue teams, government officials, and medical workers entered the region, they expected to find evidence of an epidemic, a poisonous substance, or perhaps even an act of violence. Instead, what they discovered only deepened the mystery. Village after village appeared frozen in time. Meals sat untouched on tables, doors remained open, belongings were exactly where families had left them the night before. Yet the people who should have been going about their daily routines were dead. Many victims were found lying in their beds as though they had simply fallen asleep and never awakened. Others had collapsed while trying to flee. Some were discovered only a few steps from their homes, suggesting they had sensed something was wrong but had no time to escape. Rescue workers described scenes unlike anything they had encountered before. Entire households had been wiped out. In some villages, only a handful of people remained alive. Those who survived were often confused, disoriented, and suffering from headaches, breathing difficulties, or memory loss. Several could remember hearing a distant noise during the night, but little else. One survivor recalled waking up unable to move properly, surrounded by silence. Another found nearly everyone in his village dead, including members of his own family. The emotional devastation was overwhelming. The dead numbered in the hundreds at first, but as more remote settlements were reached, the true scale of the catastrophe became apparent. More than 1,700 people had lost their lives, along with thousands of animals. It was one of the deadliest natural disasters in modern African history, yet nobody knew what had caused it. Rumors spread quickly. Some villagers believed an evil spirit had emerged from the lake. Others claimed angry ancestors had punished the region. Stories circulated about curses, demons, and supernatural forces. In isolated communities where scientific explanations were unavailable, many people struggled to comprehend how healthy individuals could simply die in their sleep. Even among officials, theories varied wildly. Could it have been a volcanic eruption, a poisonous chemical release, a secret military experiment? Some wondered whether toxic gases from underground volcanic activity had escaped into the atmosphere. Others pointed out that there were no visible signs of an eruption and no obvious damage to the landscape. The lake itself appeared strangely altered. Witnesses reported that its waters had changed color following the disaster, turning a reddish-brown shade. Vegetation near the shoreline appeared damaged, and scientists noticed evidence that a tremendous disturbance had occurred within the lake. Helicopter crews flying over the area observed something unusual as well. Trees and plants in low-lying valleys showed signs of being flattened in one direction, almost as though an invisible force had swept through the region. Yet there had been no hurricane, no explosion, and no massive landslide. The clues seemed contradictory. As international experts arrived from around the world, they began collecting samples of water, soil, and air. The challenge was enormous because much of the evidence had already disappeared. Whatever had killed the villagers had done so silently and then vanished without leaving an obvious trace. Scientists knew they were dealing with something extremely unusual. Slowly, however, pieces of the puzzle began to come together. Investigators learned that 2 years earlier, another lake in Cameroon, called Lake Nyos, had been linked to a mysterious incident in which dozens of people died suddenly. At the time, the event had received relatively little attention, and its significance was not fully understood. Now researchers wondered whether the two disasters might somehow be connected. Teams began studying the geology beneath Lake Nyos. What they discovered was alarming. The lake occupied a volcanic crater in a region where magma still existed deep underground. Although no active volcano was visible, gases continued to seep upward through cracks in the earth. One gas in particular caught the scientists' attention: carbon. Laboratory tests revealed extraordinarily high concentrations of the gas trapped within the lake's deepest waters. Yet this only raised another question. Carbon dioxide was present, but how could it have killed thousands of people across such a vast area? To answer that question, scientists needed to understand exactly what had happened during the night of August 21st. As they reconstructed the sequence of events, an increasingly terrifying picture began to emerge. The peaceful lake that villagers had trusted for generations had secretly transformed into a natural time bomb. And sometime during that night, it had detonated. The breakthrough came when scientists began examining the unique structure of Lake Nyos itself. Unlike ordinary lakes, Nyos was extraordinarily deep, reaching more than 600 feet in some places. Over many years, carbon dioxide from volcanic activity beneath the earth had seeped into the lake's bottom layers. Because the deeper water remained cold, dense, and largely undisturbed, the gas became trapped under immense pressure, dissolving into the water much like carbon dioxide is dissolved inside a sealed bottle of soda. For years, perhaps even decades, the amount of gas continued to increase. The lake looked peaceful on the surface, but hidden below was an enormous reservoir of compressed carbon dioxide. Then, sometime on the night of August 21st, something triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. Scientists still debate the exact trigger. It may have been a landslide falling into the lake. It may have been unusually cold rain disturbing the water layers. Whatever the cause, the deep water suddenly rose toward the surface. As it did, the pressure surrounding it decreased. The dissolved gas began escaping. That release forced even more deep water upward, which released even more gas. Within moments, a runaway reaction had begun. The lake effectively exploded, not with fire or lava, but with carbon dioxide. Witnesses later described hearing a roar as a column of water and gas erupted hundreds of feet into the air. Then came the invisible killer. An estimated 1.5 million tons of carbon dioxide burst from the lake and spilled over the crater's rim. Because carbon dioxide is heavier than normal air, it did not rise into the atmosphere. Instead, it hugged the ground and flowed downhill like a liquid. Silent, colorless, odorless. Entire valleys became rivers of suffocating gas. As the cloud moved through villages, it displaced oxygen from the air. People who were asleep never realized danger was approaching. They simply inhaled air containing less and less oxygen until they lost consciousness. Most never woke up. Others who were awake felt sudden dizziness, confusion, and weakness before collapsing. Livestock died where they stood. Birds fell from trees. Even insects vanished from some areas. The gas moved through the darkness with terrifying efficiency. By dawn, more than 1,700 people and roughly 3,500 animals were dead. It was one of the strangest natural disasters ever recorded because there was almost no visible destruction. Homes remained standing, crops were untouched, roads were intact. The only sign that anything had happened was the horrifying absence of life. Once scientists understood what had occurred, attention turned toward preventing another catastrophe. Their findings revealed an unsettling truth. Lake Nyos was not empty. Even after the disaster, carbon dioxide continued accumulating at the bottom of the lake. If left unchecked, another eruption could happen in the future. Engineers eventually developed a solution. Special pipes were installed deep within the lake to continuously draw carbon dioxide-rich water to the surface. As the water rises, the gas escapes safely into the atmosphere in controlled amounts. Today, visitors to Lake Nyos can see fountains of water shooting upward from these pipes, silently releasing pressure from the natural time bomb below. Yet the memory of that night remains. Survivors still remember waking to a world that no longer felt real. Some lost entire families in a matter of hours. Others returned to villages that had effectively ceased to exist. The disaster left scars that have lasted for decades. What makes the tragedy of Lake Nyos so unsettling is not merely the number of lives lost, but the nature of the threat itself. There was no warning, no visible predator, no storm on the horizon, no sound of approaching danger. The thing that killed more than 1,700 people was something every human being depends upon understanding without even thinking: the air around them. For generations, the villagers had looked upon the lake as a quiet part of the landscape, never imagining that beneath its calm waters lurked enough gas to wipe out entire communities. On the night of August 21st, 1986, that hidden danger finally emerged. It swept through the valleys like an invisible ghost, leaving silence in its wake. And by the time the sun rose over the mountains of Cameroon, some villages around Lake Nyos had become places where almost no one would ever wake up again. The disaster at Lake Nyos remains one of the deadliest and strangest natural events in modern history. It serves as a reminder that some of the most terrifying dangers on Earth are not the ones we can see, but the ones hidden beneath the surface, waiting silently for the right moment. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real mysteries, unexplained disasters, and chilling true events, be sure to subscribe. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.